Emily had always envisioned a life that felt like a refuge. Amid the hustle of her busy career and the noisy chaos of city life, she craved something quiet, something pure. A place where the noise of the world couldn't reach her, where the constant rush would slow to a crawl, and where she could finally exhale. She dreamed of a small house tucked away, surrounded by nature. A serene lake reflecting the blue sky, surrounded by the whispering pines, their branches swaying gently in the wind. It wasn't much, she didn't need grandeur. What she needed was peace. She imagined herself walking barefoot on the soft grass, a steaming mug of coffee in her hand, the morning sun casting a warm glow on her face. She could hear the distant call of birds, the rustle of leaves, the soft ripple of water lapping at the shore. It was in this stillness that she longed to find herself again. For years, she worked tirelessly to make this dream a reality, saving every penny, making sacrifices, and keeping her eyes on the prize. There were times she wondered if it would ever come true. Would her dream of a peaceful life ever take form? Would she ever escape the relentless cycle of stress, meetings, and expectations? But she never stopped believing in it, never gave up. Then, after years of hard work, it finally happened. She found it a small, cozy house by a lake, just an hour outside the city. It was perfect, it wasn't fancy, but it was hers. It was the retreat she had worked so hard for. The weight of the world, the demands of the city, all of it could be left behind. She could finally have a life filled with tranquility. But as Emily stepped into the house for the first time, a feeling began to creep in. A feeling that no one warned her about. It wasn't doubt. It wasn't regret. It was a kind of uneasy, subtle feeling that something might not be as perfect as it seemed. But she brushed it aside. She had worked for this, she had earned it. And she wasn't going to let anything stand in her way. In the weeks that followed, Emily imagined what life would look like. She pictured weekends spent together with her husband, James. They would wander through antique shops, picking out the perfect furniture to match their taste, maybe a weathered oak dining table, a soft green sofa to sink into after a long day. They'd restore the house together, piece by piece. The kind of life Emily had always dreamed of, one where love and effort filled every room. She could already hear the crackle of the fire in the stone hearth, the scent of something delicious simmering in the kitchen. Maybe her grandmother's beef stew, a recipe she cherished. She could imagine the sound of laughter echoing through the house as friends gathered for dinner. It was going to be perfect, their retreat, their life, their love. But what Emily didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was how quickly it would all unravel. The cracks began to appear slowly, like the first signs of a storm on the horizon, barely noticeable at first, but impossible to ignore once they became too big to hide. James, her husband, whom she trusted with all her heart, began to show signs of distraction. He'd become more distant, more involved with things outside their dream. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but over time, the signs were impossible to ignore. Emily could feel it, deep in her chest, the weight of it pressed against her ribs. The unease she had felt at first, the strange feeling that this peaceful sanctuary wasn't as perfect as she imagined, had started to grow. The dream she worked so hard to build, the dream that had finally become her reality, was starting to feel like a fragile bubble ready to burst. And that's when everything changed. James sat her down one evening, and with a voice that lacked its usual warmth, he told her something she wasn't prepared for. Sarah and Ethan are coming over soon. They're going to move in with us here, at the lake house. The words hit Emily like a ton of bricks. Her dream, the one place she thought she could finally feel safe, was no longer just hers. It was being shared with people who had no place there. The woman who had once been James' wife, his ex-wife, Sarah, and his son from that earlier chapter of his life. It wasn't just a temporary arrangement, either. They were moving in permanently, at least for the time being. Emily's mind raced. What had happened to their dream? What had happened to the plans they had made together? She felt the familiar rush of anger and confusion, but more than that, she felt a deep sense of betrayal. How could he decide something so monumental without consulting her? How could he take their sanctuary, the one place that was meant to be their escape, and turn it into a place for someone else? As the days went by, Emily's anger simmered. She couldn't escape it. The thought of sharing her space with Sarah, the woman who had once been the most important person in James' life, consumed her. The lake house, once a symbol of her hard work and dreams, was now a battlefield, and Emily wasn't sure if she would survive it. But even then, she held on to hope. She thought that maybe, just maybe, she could still find peace. Maybe they could all coexist in this space. Maybe she could learn to share it. But deep down, a part of her knew that things would never be the same. The dream she had so carefully constructed was already slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The only thing left now was to face the truth. Before we move further into Emily's story, I want to take a moment and ask you to consider, when your dreams are challenged by the people closest to you, do you fight to hold on to them, or do you let go and start fresh? Answer this question in the comments below. A fight for the dream, no matter what? Be let go and create a new path forward. If you enjoyed this story and want more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and support the channel. It helps keep the stories coming and inspires us to bring more heartfelt content like this one. Let's continue the journey. Stay tuned for what happens next. Emily and James had always been the kind of couple that made others believe in love. Their connection was undeniable, and their love story was one that seemed written in the stars. They met in their early 30s, both having lived through their share of challenges. For Emily, it had been the heavy weight of personal loss, the scars of deep grief after losing her father, and the heartbreaking miscarriage that had left a hole in her heart. For James, life hadn't been much simpler. His divorce from Sarah, the woman he once thought he'd build a future with, had left its mark on him too. But together, they had found a sense of peace, a place where their pasts could remain in the background, and their future could finally take shape. Their marriage, which had started with such fierce passion, was built on the foundation of shared dreams and deep trust. Emily, with her spontaneous energy and the spark in her eyes, and James, with his calm demeanor and unwavering support, seemed to complement each other perfectly. They made each other better. The first few years were filled with laughter and warmth. They would talk about everything and nothing for hours, their voices blending in a rhythm that felt natural. There was something comforting about their routine. Emily loved how James would make her morning coffee, placing it just the way she liked it on the kitchen counter while she tied her shoes, getting ready for another busy day. He was the steady presence in her life, always reliable, always there. In the evenings, they would often curl up together on the couch, with the soft hum of the television in the background. Sometimes, they'd cook together, James flipping through recipe books while Emily chopped vegetables, their laughter spilling over as they joked about who was the better cook. James always made her feel like the world was okay, like everything would work out, no matter the troubles that might come their way. He was her rock, but deep down, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but it was as though they were operating on autopilot, moving through their days without truly seeing each other. She had once thought that love was enough, that shared moments and simple gestures would be enough to keep a marriage strong. But with each passing day, she felt a quiet shift to dissonance she couldn't ignore. They hadn't planned for the changes that came with the house. The lake house was supposed to be their retreat, their fresh start. The vision Emily had was clear, the two of them finding peace and joy in their new life, a life built around each other. It was supposed to be a time for them to reconnect, to deepen their bond. But as the months passed, James had become increasingly absorbed in other things: work, old friendships, and the lingering presence of his past life. They still shared moments, of course, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. Emily began to notice the small things: the way James would absent-mindedly stare at his phone during dinner, his laughter no longer reaching his eyes. The long conversations they once had about their dreams seemed to fade into the background of everyday chores and responsibilities. When they did talk, it was often about the house, about the future, but it was all surface level. Their words no longer held the weight they once did. James was still there, but he wasn't there. Emily could see it in the way he started spending more time away from home. He would take longer runs, disappear into his office for hours, and when he was home, his mind seemed to be a million miles away. They still had their weekends together, but they had become routine, predictable. There were no more surprises, no more spontaneous adventures. No more of the little sparks that had once made their relationship feel alive. What hurt Emily the most was that she could feel the distance growing between them, but James never seemed to notice. He was content in his own world, comfortable in his habits. He was still the same man she had married, in many ways kind, steady, loving, but something had shifted. The intimacy they once shared, the kind that made them feel like they were in sync, had started to slip through their fingers, unnoticed. She told herself that this was just a phase. It was normal for relationships to ebb and flow, right? Maybe this was just a temporary lull, but deep down, Emily knew something was wrong. She tried to talk to James about it, tried to bring up her concerns, but every time she did, he would brush it off, telling her everything was fine, that he was just busy. He didn't see the need to dig deeper. He didn't realize the weight of the silence that had started to fill the space between them. Emily, however, felt the tension. It was growing, pulling at the seams of their connection. She found herself questioning whether they had truly built something lasting, or if they had simply become two people who had learned to coexist rather than truly live together. Then, one day, as Emily was preparing dinner, something broke. James came home earlier than usual, and his face told a story she wasn't ready to hear. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a quiet tension she hadn't seen before. He sat her down in the living room, his posture stiff, his usual warmth gone. He told her about Sarah and Ethan moving into the lake house. The words were simple, but they hit Emily like a sledgehammer. They were moving in, no discussion, no consultation. Just a sudden, unavoidable change. The dream Emily had held so tightly in her heart, the one she had worked so hard for, was no longer just hers. It was a shared space now, and not with just anyone, but with the ghosts of James' past. The woman who had once been the most important person in his life, his ex-wife, and the son from their marriage to people Emily hadn't signed up to live with. She was blindsided. She had always known about Sarah, of course, but she never imagined that James would invite her into their home, their sanctuary. Emily was hurt, deeply hurt. She felt betrayed, abandoned. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. This wasn't the future they had talked about. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much James had taken her for granted. He assumed that she would always be there, that she would always bend and make room for his needs and the demands of his past. But what about her? What about the dream she had worked for? Did he ever stop to think about how she might feel about all of this? The moment that should have been their fresh start, their escape from the chaos of life, had become the very thing that threatened to tear them apart. Emily could no longer deny the truth. The man she thought she knew, the man she had trusted with her heart, had made a decision that changed everything. As she sat there, the weight of his words sinking in, Emily realized that something had irrevocably shifted. The life they had once built together was no longer enough to keep them connected. She had hoped for peace, for serenity, but what she was getting was uncertainty and pain. The love they had shared was starting to feel like a distant memory, slipping away bit by bit. And in that moment, Emily knew that this wasn't just about Sarah and Ethan moving in, it was about something deeper. It was about her own realization that she had lost herself in the process of trying to hold onto a love that was no longer what it once had been. As James spoke, trying to explain his reasons, Emily's mind raced. She was no longer listening to him. She was thinking about the life she wanted, the life she deserved, the peace she had dreamed of, the sanctuary that she had worked so hard for, was slipping away, and she didn't know if she could get it back. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. She had to change. The house, once filled with the echoes of Emily's dreams, suddenly felt colder, like a room that had been visited by ghosts of the past. What was meant to be a sanctuary, a peaceful retreat, was slowly being transformed into a battleground for a relationship she thought was strong, but now seemed so fragile. James had told her the news with a calmness that only made the weight of it all more suffocating. Sarah and Ethan were moving in. For a moment, Emily could only sit there, the words swirling around her mind like a storm. She couldn't control Sarah and Ethan, his ex-wife, his son moving into their home, their retreat. It felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling, and she was desperately trying to hold on, but the pieces were slipping through her fingers. Emily had always known that Sarah existed, that she had once been a significant part of James' life. She had accepted that, or at least, she had convinced herself that she had. After all, James had always been open about his past, about his loyalty to his son, Ethan. It was part of what made him the man she loved, a man who stood by his responsibilities, no matter the cost. She had admired him for it, but this was something different. What Emily had never signed up for was living with the remnants of James' previous life, in a house that was meant to symbolize their future together. They had poured their hopes into that home, imagining weekends spent together, cooking, laughing, dreaming. It wasn't supposed to be a place where old memories resurfaced, where Sarah's presence, both physical and emotional, loomed like a shadow in the corners of their new life. James had made this decision on his own, without consulting her, without considering the impact it would have on their relationship. It wasn't just that Sarah and Ethan were coming to stay. It was the way James had casually, almost matter-of-factly, announced it as if it was just another minor inconvenience. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. They need help, Em. Sarah's been struggling since she lost her job, and she's really down. I can't just let her figure it out on her own. And Ethan ... he needs a place to stay. It's only temporary, he had said. Temporary? The word lingered in the air like a hollow promise. How could something so significant be so easily brushed aside? Emily had heard the same thing before, many times, in different situations, but it never seemed to change. It was always about his need to help, to fix things for others. Emily understood the value of loyalty, of being there for the people you loved. But in that moment, all she could feel was betrayal. It wasn't just the fact that Sarah and Ethan were coming to stay. It was the realization that James had never truly seen her in this. He had never really seen how much she had dreamed for this place to be theirs, how much she had invested in their future together. At first, she had tried to rationalize it. Sarah was going through a hard time, and Ethan was just a kid who needed a roof over his head. Surely, this was just an act of kindness, right? But as she sat there, listening to James explain the situation as though it was a simple logistical decision, Emily could feel something inside her begin to shift. She wasn't just angry, she was confused, hurt, and incredibly alone. They had talked about this house, they had talked about what it would represent, the fresh start, the peace, the life they would build together. They had picked out furniture, made plans for weekends away, and dreamed about their future, and now, that dream was being interrupted by the very thing Emily had feared all along, the intrusion of James' past into their present. It was one thing to accept Sarah as part of his life. It was another to invite her into their home, to disrupt the peace Emily had worked so hard to create. The next few days were blurred. Emily tried to adjust, to prepare herself for what was to come, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like she was losing control. The lake house, once a symbol of their love and commitment, now felt like a place where everything was falling apart. She went through the motions of cleaning and cooking, but her mind was elsewhere. She imagined Sarah in the kitchen, making herself at home, maybe sitting at the table Emily had envisioned for the two of them. She pictured Ethan running through the house, filling the space with energy, but it wasn't the energy she had imagined. It was chaos, a reminder that their quiet retreat was now something different. James, of course, was oblivious. He couldn't see what Emily was feeling, couldn't understand why this was so difficult for her. He was simply doing what he thought was right, but Emily wasn't sure anymore. She wasn't sure if she could live in a house that wasn't truly hers anymore. She wasn't sure if she could be the wife he needed while living with the woman he had once loved and the child he had raised with her. Each day, the discomfort grew. Emily began to resent the way James spoke so easily about Sarah, as if nothing had changed. She resented the way he would mention her name in casual conversation, or how he would take long phone calls, his voice soft and tender as he talked to her. It wasn't just that Sarah was moving in, it was the way James still seemed to need her, in ways Emily hadn't realized before. Emily had always known that James had a deep sense of responsibility to his ex-wife and son, but she hadn't understood how much it would affect their marriage, how much it would demand from her. By the time Sarah and Ethan finally arrived, Emily had already built a wall around herself. She tried to be polite, tried to make small talk, but it was hard. Every glance at Sarah, every interaction with Ethan, felt like a reminder of what Emily had lost. He dreamed she had worked so hard for, the peaceful life she had imagined, was slipping away, and she couldn't stop it. James, for all his kindness, had never understood the depths of Emily's heart. He had never understood that for her, this house wasn't just a house. It was a reflection of everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in. It was a space she had envisioned for them, for their future, but now it wasn't just theirs. It was shared, and it was being tainted by the past she hadn't asked to be a part of. As the days went on, Emily tried to adjust, to make peace with the situation, but the discomfort lingered. Every time Sarah walked into the room, every time Ethan called out for James, a part of Emily felt like she was losing the battle. Her heart, once full of hope for the future, now felt heavy with doubt. How could she continue to live in a place that had become so alien to her? How could she keep pretending that everything was okay when her dreams were slowly being replaced by someone else's? The reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about Sarah and Ethan moving in. It was about everything that had gone unsaid in their marriage. It was about the spaces between them, the silent distance that had been growing for months, maybe even years. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. She couldn't pretend that things were fine when they weren't, and as much as she tried to hold on, she knew deep down that the life she had imagined was slipping further away, one day at a time. It was a Saturday morning when Emily found the message. It had been an ordinary day, one she expected to unfold like the countless others, sunlight streaming through the window, a cup of coffee in her hand, and the quiet hum of the house as she worked on a few things. The lake outside was calm, as it often was in the early hours of the day. There was peace in the stillness, a peace she had fought so hard to find. But in the very moment she found herself reaching for her phone, that peace was shattered. James had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, as he often did. He was always so absent-minded, never thinking to lock it or hide his private conversations. Emily had never felt the need to snoop. She trusted him, trusted their bond. But that day, something was different. The air felt charged with an unfamiliar heaviness, a nagging feeling she couldn't quite place. She picked up the laptop, absently scrolling through the tabs, when her finger hovered over a message notification on the screen. The name on the sender's line sent a jolt through her chest. Sarah, her heart skipped. She told herself not to click on it, to close the laptop and leave it alone. But her curiosity, driven by some deep instinct she couldn't ignore, won out. She opened the message. The words she read hit her like a physical blow. At first, it was disbelief, then a cold wave of shock. James had been speaking to Sarah with a cruelty that was unrecognizable. It wasn't just the casual chat between exes, there was venom in his words, mocking and belittling Emily in a way she couldn't comprehend. James had referred to her weight, her appearance, her most intimate vulnerabilities, all the things he had once claimed to love about her. He was now tearing apart behind her back. I can hardly stand sharing a bed with her anymore, Sarah, she's disgusting. The rolls of fat shaking when she breathes, the snoring, it's unbearable, one message read. Emily could feel her breath catch in her throat, her stomach churning as she read through the conversation. She had trusted him, loved him with every piece of herself. And now, here she was betrayed by the one person she thought would never hurt her. There were pictures to photos of her, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm brewing. James had taken them without her knowledge, sending them to Sarah with cruel comments about her body. The worst part was not just what he had said, it was the casual nature of it all, the way he had shared those intimate moments with Sarah as if it were a joke, a game. He had laughed about her, made her the punchline in a conversation that was supposed to be private, supposed to be sacred. Her hands were trembling as she scrolled through the messages. She could feel the rage building inside of her, a mix of hurt and disbelief that threatened to overwhelm her. How could James, the man who had promised to love her through everything, reduce her to this? How could he turn their private moments, their love, into something so ugly, so disposable? And Sarah, the woman who had once been his wife, the woman who had shared a life with him, and now the woman who seemed to be gleeful in her role as an accomplice in this betrayal. The messages between James and Sarah were laced with laughter, as if it was all just a cruel joke, as if Emily was nothing more than a nuisance to be mocked. The pain in Emily's chest felt as though it would tear her apart. She had trusted both of them. She had believed in the goodness of James, in the love they had built together. Now, that trust was shattered. The world around her began to spin. The house, which had once been a symbol of hope and love, now felt cold, suffocating. The walls, once warm and comforting, now felt like they were closing in on her. How had she missed it? How had she been blind to the fact that her husband was capable of such cruelty? For a long moment, she sat there, the laptop resting on her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to make sense of it, tried to rationalize it, but there was no rationalizing this. No way to explain away the betrayal, no way to justify the pain he had caused her. The man she had built a life with, the man who had promised to cherish her, had thrown her aside like she didn't matter. The hurt was overwhelming, but even more than that, there was a profound sense of loss. The dream she had worked so hard to build, the future they had promised each other, it was all a lie. Her mind raced. She needed answers. She needed to confront him, but what would she say? What words could possibly express the depth of her betrayal, the anguish she felt in her bones? She closed the laptop and stood up, her legs shaking as she walked to the kitchen counter. The cup of coffee she had made earlier sat there, cold and untouched. She couldn't bring herself to drink it. As she stood there, the reality of the situation began to sink in. It wasn't just about the words James had said or the pictures he had taken. It was the truth of their relationship, the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. She had been blind to it, or perhaps she had simply refused to see it. But now, there was no denying it. James had never truly seen her for who she was. He had never truly loved her in the way she had loved him. He had used her, manipulated her love for him, all while hiding behind a mask of affection and loyalty. It wasn't just the cruelty of his words, it was the fact that he had taken her trust, her vulnerability, and twisted it into something ugly. It was the fact that he had gone behind her back, made her the object of ridicule, and thought nothing of it. The realization was like a sharp blade cutting through her chest. She had been living a lie, and now there was no way to unsee it. Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't going to cry for him. She wasn't going to let him have that power over her anymore. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about her. As she stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, the weight of the situation finally hit her. She had a choice to make. She could confront James, try to salvage whatever was left of their marriage, or she could walk away. The decision loomed in front of her, dark and heavy. But as she looked out at the lake, the water calm and serene, she realized one thing: whatever decision she made, it had to be for her peace, for her happiness. And in that moment, she knew that her life, her future, could no longer be tied to someone who had betrayed her so completely. The betrayal had shattered everything, but now Emily had to rebuild herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, she understood something deeply. She didn't need James, she needed herself. And she was going to fight to get back to the woman she had once been. Emily never imagined that after all the pain, there would come a moment when she could feel whole again. It had been a long time since she felt like herself, longer still since she had felt safe. The betrayal of James, the man she had once trusted with her heart, had shattered her in ways she couldn't have prepared for. She had spent months picking up the pieces, but there were moments when she didn't even know where to begin. Every corner of her life felt tainted by that hurt. Every space she had once shared with him now felt hollow and alien. She had wanted to be strong, but there were times when the weight of her broken heart was too much to carry alone. It was in this space of despair, when Emily was learning to live without the man she had believed would be her forever, that Kevin came into her life. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't some whirlwind romance that swept her off her feet. In fact, it started with something as simple as a conversation. A comment here, a message there, nothing more than casual exchanges at first. But even those small moments carried something Emily hadn't felt in a long time: gentleness. Kevin wasn't like the others. He didn't rush her, didn't expect anything from her. He was just there, and that was enough. For weeks, their interactions were light, nothing serious. She was still raw from everything with James, and Kevin seems to understand that. He didn't push her, didn't try to make her feel something she wasn't ready to feel. He simply offered a steady presence. They talked about books, music, life in general. They shared stories, but not too much at once. He never asked her to talk about James or the pain she was still processing. He respected her space, and in doing so, he showed Emily that there was room for someone else in her life, but only on her terms. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, after a long week at work, Emily found herself sitting at a cafe, waiting for a friend who had been running late. She checked her phone, and there was a message from Kevin. He had been texting her more often, but this one was different. It was simple. How are you really doing? Something about that question broke through the walls Emily had so carefully built around herself. It wasn't the first time someone had asked how she was doing, but there was something in Kevin's tone that made her pause. He wasn't asking out of politeness or concern for the small things. He wanted to know how she was really doing. The kind of question that required honesty, vulnerability, and trust. For the first time in months, she let herself be vulnerable. She told him the truth. She told him how much the betrayal had hurt, how the life she had built had been torn apart. She told him about the sadness that clung to her, the way she couldn't shake the image of what James had done. She told him how difficult it had been to see her own reflection in the aftermath of the destruction. And Kevin listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. He simply listened and allowed her to say what she needed to say. It was the first time in a long time that Emily had felt truly heard. There was no judgment, no pity, just a quiet understanding. And in that moment, Emily realized something. For the first time since everything with James had imploded, she felt like she could breathe again. She felt like she could be honest, be herself, without fear of being hurt. It was slow at first, this new connection, but slowly it became something more. Kevin didn't ask for her to be anything she wasn't ready to be. He didn't push her into a relationship before she was ready. What he did was show her kindness, patience, and respect. He treated her with a tenderness that had been absent from her life for so long, and it was that tenderness that began to rebuild the parts of her that had been lost. They spent weekends together, walking through parks, hiking trails, and sharing quiet moments. Kevin's presence was soothing. He never made her feel like she had to rush. He didn't ask her to let go of the past. Instead, he allowed her to move at her own pace. To heal on her terms. He understood that healing wasn't a straight path. It was a winding road with detours and dead ends, but it was still a road worth traveling. And along that road, Kevin offered something James never had: true partnership. For Emily, the most profound thing about Kevin was his authenticity. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't try to be, but he was real. His kindness wasn't calculated, his attentiveness wasn't out of obligation. Kevin didn't see Emily as someone broken who needed fixing. He saw her as someone whole, deserving of love and respect, just as she was. And that was something she had never fully experienced before. There were moments, of course, when Emily hesitated. She questioned whether she could truly open her heart again, whether she could trust someone else with her love after what had happened. But Kevin never pressured her. He never tried to force his way in. He let her take the lead, and when she was ready, he was there. Slowly, but surely, Emily began to realize that she didn't need to keep holding on to the past. She didn't need to punish herself for someone else's mistakes. She was worthy of love, of happiness, and of a fresh start. And it was in Kevin's arms, in the quiet moments they shared, that Emily began to see the possibility of a future again, a future that was hers, that was built not on the ashes of what had been, but on the foundation of something new, something real. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the pain she had gone through, but it was a new beginning. A beginning that she had created for herself, with Kevin by her side. He wasn't her savior, but he was the person who reminded her that life still had beauty left to offer. That love, even after betrayal, was still possible, that there was still hope. Emily had learned that love wasn't about finding someone who could fix the broken parts of her. It was about finding someone who could walk with her while she healed. And Kevin, in his quiet way, had become that person. He had become the reminder that while her past would always be a part of her, it didn't define her. She could still choose the life she wanted, the happiness she deserved. And so, with each passing day, Emily grew stronger. With Kevin, she learned that love could be simple, gentle, and kind, without needing to be loud or dramatic. She began to trust again, not just him, but herself. She began to believe that she was capable of happiness, capable of moving forward, and capable of loving again. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were still scars, still moments of doubt. But with Kevin by her side, Emily knew one thing for certain. She had found something worth holding on to. And that was all she needed to begin again. The journey of Emily from heartache to healing is a poignant reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Betrayal, no matter how devastating, is not the end of the road. It is merely a painful chapter in a story that is still unfolding. In Emily's case, the painful discovery of her husband's betrayal, the shattering of trust, and the emotional aftermath could have been the final blow. It could have been the moment she gave up on love and on herself. But it wasn't. Instead, Emily chose to walk through the storm, face her pain, and rebuild her life. This story illustrates the importance of healing. Healing isn't a linear process. It isn't about erasing the past or forgetting the pain. Instead, healing is about learning to live with the pain, embracing the lessons it brings, and moving forward with the wisdom gained from that experience. Emily's path to healing wasn't instantaneous. It took time, self-reflection, and most importantly, the courage to open herself up to a new kind of love, a love that wasn't rooted in expectations or past hurt, but in the beauty of kindness and patience. One of the most profound lessons Emily's story offers is that love, in its truest form, isn't about finding someone who can fix the broken parts of you. It's about finding someone who will walk with you while you heal. Love is not about perfection. It is not about finding someone who will meet all your needs or erase all your fears. Love is about trust, respect, and understanding. It's about two people meeting each other where they are, accepting their flaws, and building something meaningful together. Emily's journey with Kevin shows us that love can be gentle, patient, and rooted in mutual respect, qualities that are often lost in the chaos of modern relationships. This is a powerful reminder that we must first learn to love and care for ourselves before we can fully open ourselves to love someone else. Emily had to find healing within before she could accept the kindness and love that Kevin had to offer. She had to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made and the trust she had misplaced. She had to rediscover her worth and recognize that her happiness and peace were within her control. We can apply this lesson to our own lives in many ways. First and foremost, we must give ourselves the permission to heal. Healing takes time, and it's okay not to have all the answers right away. Life is full of difficult moments, and while they may leave scars, those scars don't define us. We have the power to choose how we move forward. We can choose to be better, stronger, and wiser because of the pain we've endured. Another important lesson here is the value of kindness in relationships. Whether romantic or platonic, kindness forms the foundation of trust. Kevin's patience and genuine care for Emily showed her that love doesn't have to be rushed or complicated. Too often, we rush into relationships looking for validation or fulfillment, but true love is patient. It gives room for growth, for vulnerability, and for understanding. If we approach relationships with this mindset, we will be able to build stronger, more fulfilling connections with others. Lastly, Emily's journey reminds us that it's okay to walk away when something is no longer serving us. Whether it's a relationship, a job, or a situation, there are times when we must let go. We must give ourselves permission to release things that bring us pain and choose a different path, one that is aligned with our values, our needs, and our aspirations. It's about reclaiming our power and stepping into the life we deserve. In Emily's case, letting go of her past with James didn't mean she was giving up on love. It meant she was making space for the right kind of love, one that was rooted in mutual respect and kindness. Letting go of what no longer serves us is an act of self-love. It's an opportunity to create the space for new possibilities to unfold, a question for reflection. Have you ever had to let go of something or someone that wasn't serving you, and how did that decision impact your life moving forward? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how others have navigated similar situations, and your insights could be helpful to someone else going through a tough time. And if you found this content valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means a lot and encourages me to continue creating more helpful and inspiring content. As I get older, I want to dedicate my time to making a positive impact on society. And your subscription and donations, no matter how small, really motivate me to keep going. Thank you for being part of this journey.